Hello, and welcome to the This is Engineering's Earth Day Q&A. Thank you for joining us. I'm Poppy Morgan, Campaign Officer for This is Engineering, and I'll be leading the talk with our engineers today. For Earth Day, we want to talk about the different ways engineers help us restore our Earth and celebrate how engineering helps solve environmental problems, both big and small. If you enjoyed today's session, visit our website where there are 5 other inspirational engineering Q&As that we did as part of the This is Engineering Day for you to watch. This session will remain online for you to share and watch as you like. If you have any questions you'd like to ask an engineer, you can contact us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or our website and suggest themes we can talk about in the next one. We're also excited to say you can view our virtual museum, the Museum of Engineering Innovation, if you want to learn more about engineering at the cutting edge. Visit the This is Engineering website to find out more about engineering in everything from theatre and architecture to medicine and sport. Engineers are behind many surprising things in our lives, and the future of the environment is no different. From clean energy to circular economies, engineers are working towards the solutions to a cleaner future. I'm joined by 2 wonderful engineers today from Resource Futures and the University of Oxford, who are going to share why they are passionate about restoring our Earth this Earth Day. Thank you both for joining us. Olivia, would you like to tell us a little about yourself and your engineering journey?
Hi, thank you for having me here today. So I'm Olivia. I studied chemical engineering at university. I went up to Edinburgh for university and I graduated in 2017. The reason for me choosing engineering was because I wanted to make a change in the field of sustainability, but I didn't really know the way to do that. So I thought an engineering degree was just a great way to get skills and hopefully get there. When I was studying, my plan was to go into green or renewable energy development. But since I've graduated, I worked at Lush, which is a cosmetics company that focuses on doing things in a way that doesn't impact the planet negatively. And at that job, I got really interested in the circular economy, so making things from waste or seeing waste as a resource. And that moved me to my new job, which is for Resource Futures. And I'm a sustainable waste consultant. So I'm looking at everything to do with the rubbish you put in your bins.
That's fabulous. I've never heard the job title like that before, so I look forward to diving more into that. And our second engineer is Rosa. So please tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, I'm Rosa. I'm a second-year engineering student at the University of Oxford. I'm quite early on in my engineering experience or journey. I studied A-levels and GCSEs and then went straight into studying my degree. The reason why I chose engineering and went down this route was wanting to, similar to Olivia, wanting to have a positive impact and using science as a tool to do so. I wasn't sure quite what to do, and in the end I chose engineering. And I think what actually engaged me within engineering was the sustainability side and seeing how we could solve problems such as climate change and environmental issues, but also social issues and things like that through engineering.
That's fabulous. I'm really looking forward to learning more about your engineering journey so far. And so to get started, I'd really like to know about a project you're really proud of, whether that's at work or through university. So Olivia, let's start with you.
So a project I'm really proud of, when I was at Lush. So this is a project that I've actually finished, which always makes it easier to be prouder of it when it's done. When I was at Lush, I was responsible for aroma chemicals. So they are things in fragrances that make it smell nice, but they're synthetic materials. So my job was trying to make them as sustainable and environmentally friendly as possible, and particularly focusing on the non-animal testing that's really important with Lush. And synthetic materials are really related to crude oil, which isn't the best thing when you're thinking about the environment. Fossil fuels, there's a lot of negative impacts associated with fossil fuels. So I was trying to move away from that. So one of the things I managed to do was move ethanol to a different source. So ethanol is an alcohol that you use to make perfumes. It's the majority of the liquid in perfumes. So I managed to move from kind of a bad source that was derived from fossil fuels, and I moved it to a source out in Brazil. So it's organic ethanol. So that means it's made without using any pesticides or bad chemicals to grow the crop. It's made from a crop. It's made from sugarcane, but it's the waste product. So sugarcane's growing so you can have sugar, and they just take off the waste and make ethanol from it. So it's minimizing the impact from that perspective. And also the source that they use is fair trade. So that means it's paying, or fair for life, I should say. So it's paying the staff that work there fair wages and enough of a living, enough to make a good living. And the other thing it's doing is it's also regenerating the soil. So the farming practices that they use out there are really positive, and they're putting as much back in as they can. And they're doing really cool stuff like using their spare heat from the process to give power back to homes in the communities. So there's lots of levels of really good things that are happening. So I managed to swap our yearly supply to that after having gone to visit them out in Brazil, which was nice and fun. But there was also an inspection from HMRC, which is the tax office, because they didn't want me to be importing lots of alcohol without the right license. So it was scary at the same time, but it was really, really cool to be able to see that through from the beginning and learning so much about, I knew the theory about the process of making ethanol, but learning so much about the details and how things are fermented, and that tapped into my chemical engineering. Even though I was kind of overseeing management of it, I was able to really understand the details around what made it better and what made it worse. And I know I'm talking a lot, but one more thing I'll add is we did a proper carbon footprint. So carbon footprinting was new to Lush at the time. They're doing much more of it now. And so we calculated the carbon footprint for the material that we were buying at the time. It was actually made in the UK, but it was made from fossil fuels, compared to buying stuff from Brazil and shipping it over, and even including all that extra kind of shipping that was a real worry for us. We were reducing our carbon footprint. So we were really able to clearly calculate the benefit we were doing. And I think that's really important, as Rosa mentioned, with working in the green space, is not only having great ideas and trying to do things that are really good, but grounding it in kind of data and science. So we were able to put the numbers out there that showed we were actually making the right choice.
That's fascinating. What an excuse to go to Brazil. So that's fab. And it's always a surprise to hear about engineers in all sorts of places. So I wouldn't have thought Lush was the top of the list, but there we go. And Rosa, is there a project that you've worked on, or that you know one of your lecturers is working on, that you find really rewarding or fascinating?
Oh, when you say lecturers, I immediately thought of my tutors. They are working on like ventilators for COVID, and so that was like such an important and vital project at this time, and having a like direct impact on communities. And I know they especially worked in Mexico, where like there is, oh sorry, maybe it was Brazil, but where they were able to like help communities who weren't necessarily like, who were struggling more with COVID than per se like other countries were.
For sure, and it shows how engineering really does save lives. So that must be so inspirational to work so closely with people doing that. And you've both said you're passionate about the environment and building a sustainable future. So why did you choose engineering as the way to do this? Rosa, you're studying now, so that's a bit closer to home for you. Yes, why engineering for this sustainable future?
I think engineering is such a broad and creative industry, and it's constantly adapting, and I like how that excites me, how limitless like the potential of engineering is, and how also how like all the different disciplines link together to create such an impact, and which can be such a positive impact on the world.
Thank you. And Olivia, you talked about how engineering, you knew it was the way, and that was why you chose that for your sustainable future. What was it about engineering that you knew you'd be able to work on such projects, if you even knew these kind of projects would come?
So I definitely echo everything that Rosa said about how engineering can have such a big impact. I definitely didn't know I would end up here when I started studying, but that's part of the exciting and creativity and the fact that you're learning these skills that are just so desirable in the job market, if you want to think about it that way, but also just so useful to every part of kind of day to day, and making that change. I think for me, I knew engineering was the right choice because it was that balance between kind of creativity, changing big things, but also basing it in facts and in data and in science. It's a nice balance between making something new, making something different, thinking about things in new and exciting ways, but also always bringing it back to the fact that, you know, X plus Y has always got to equal this, or, you know, those limitations as well. So you can really see the improvements you're making. And I think that's sometimes what's really difficult with the sustainability space and trying to make things better is there's so much out there that you want to make better and you want to make it so much better, and it can be really difficult and overwhelming. But grounding that in engineering, for me, I could really clearly see this is where I want to be, and it's going to be crazy and really hard, but I'm going to do all these little steps and I know I'm going to get there. So that's what worked well for me.
Thank you. And yeah, it's great to see that outcome, and almost the predictability in some ways makes it feel really safe and secure and tangible. You know what you're getting out of it, but it sounds like there's been a lot of creativity along the way to get there. So that's fascinating. And you've mentioned a little bit already, Olivia, about carbon footprints. So how can engineering help us become carbon neutral?
In loads of different ways. So, I mean, I know we're promoting engineering, but engineering is everything. So it's going to help reduce carbon in all the different places. So, I mean, becoming carbon neutral and net zero is now one of the targets for the UK by 2050. And I live in Bristol, and they're trying to do it by 2030, which is going to be difficult. But it's really cool, but it's going to be difficult. And one of the biggest things with carbon emissions is the transport system. So that's intrinsic to engineering. So making fuel more efficient and greener and less reliant on fossil fuels. And there's loads of engineers working in, may that be solar, wind, or water, or hydrogen power. But then the flip side of that, it's not just thinking about kind of like cars on the road and making the current systems we have better. It's also about reimagining the system, and engineers are a big part of that, because one of the best ways to reduce the impact of transport is to swap to buses or trains, or design roads that are better for people to walk or use their bike on, as opposed to having to drive. So then you come to, you know, different forms of engineering that look at, you know, the system and design of spaces. So there's loads of different types of engineers being involved in, you know, just transport, and that's the top impact, but there's so much else going out there. So that's my answer off the top of my head.
That's lovely, and it's really putting the humanity into engineering. It's not all spreadsheets and numbers, it's talking about how people work in a city, how they move through a city or town. So that's great. And Rosa, what are some of the ways you know that engineering can help us become carbon neutral?
One of the projects or companies that inspired me when I was applying for engineering and looking into it was a company called Uncharted Power, and they have various projects, but one in particular was using footballs to generate electricity to power homes at night. So people would be able to like kick the footballs around. It was used particularly in Africa where it was off the grid. And they could use it to study in the nighttime, where otherwise they would have been using kerosene lamps and various means that would have like a negative impact on the environment. Whereas this was something that was green, and it was innovative solution, and yeah, it was inspiring to see.
That's amazing. So we've talked about engineering and beauty and now engineering and football as well, and all to do with the environment as well. So that's really interesting, and I'd never heard of that before. I'll definitely look it up. And I'd say when we talk environmental issues, I think one of the first thing that comes to mind is plastic. We'll go back to you, Rosa. How can we respond to our plastic problems? How can engineers be part of that solution?
It's crazy how all the different disciplines can find ways to solve this problem. For example, with chemical engineering and looking at the properties of plastic and how we can break it down. And one example is people are developing bacteria to break down plastic, and another is this company who makes it like a polyfloss machine. That's what it's called, and basically it shreds plastic and it melts it down to make it into like thin, like candy floss like material, and so that is used to insulate homes for like emergency aid relief and things like that in countries where there's always going to be waste around, but using it in a positive way and to like help communities in times of like natural disasters and things like that. So yeah, that's another innovative solution, and yeah, a great solution to.
That's so interesting. Yeah, bacteria eating plastic and candy floss plastic weren't things I was expecting to hear either. And Olivia, what's your experience in fighting the plastic problem?
So my job at the moment is within the waste industry. So plastics is a massive thing, and we throw away a lot of plastic. And I think engineers are part of responding to that in all the different ways. So we need to help create a world where not everything uses plastic. So we're thinking about new materials or different ways of doing things, and that's a part that engineers can play. But we also can't forget about all the plastic that already exists. So how do we process that? So chemical recycling, similar to the bacteria that Rosa talked about, is coming into place. So we can break plastic down into its constituent chemicals and go from there. And then there's also that circular economy and the innovative. It's better to reuse and minimize and make it into something else as opposed to just rely on recycling. So I'm working on a particular project that focuses on flexible packaging because arguably, I mean, in an ideal world, we'd live in a place where there was no plastic, but when you're talking about plastic, there's lots of different types. So solid plastic, so like you get a punnet of strawberries in or a bottle of Coke. It's not ideal, but we know how to process that, and it can be processed and recycled quite well. But things like flexible plastics, so the lid of that punnet of strawberries, or the like pouch that you can get grated cheese in, or things like that, they're really difficult to process, not only because we can't collect them, or they get lost because they fly away in the wind, and they end up polluting all weird places, but they're just really difficult to process, and they're made up of a more complicated mix of chemicals. So whereas a plastic punnet is made out of one type of plastic, a pouch is made up of about 4 or 5, so it's just really difficult to deal with. So I'm working on a project that brings together lots of different types of people to try and influence product design. So that's where engineers can come into play as well. So a lot of the time in industry, people just do things because they've always done them and nobody questions it. So we're looking at well, why are you using 4 layers of different types of plastic for this? Can we use 2 instead? Can we use a different one? What products are people actually buying? And so do we even need to make that product at all because nobody's buying it? What are people putting in which bins and in what quantity and why? So a lot of people really want to make a difference. So they put plastic films in their recycling bin, but it can't be recycled. So it ends up contaminating the whole recycling batch. So none of it can be recycled at all. So kind of looking at all these different angles to try and solve the problem. So there's a lot going on with plastics. Ideally, we use none, but it's not that simple.
That's really interesting. So we've got the ideal situation, then how to fix the structure, but then there's also the new materials as well. So there's engineers basically on every stage of the journey. That's fascinating. And this year's Earth Day theme is Restore Our Earth. So what environmental issue are you really passionate about? And how do you think engineers can help in restoring our Earth? Olivia, let's start with you.
So I'm lucky enough to have another job as well as my job as a sustainable waste consultant, and it's a role called a Black and Green Ambassador, and that looks at how people's different circumstances influences how they can interact with climate change and sustainability. So it's easier for some people to decide, I'm going to spend £5 more so I can buy organic food every day of the week. That's a choice that only certain people can make, but it should be accessible to everyone. So I look at how it can be something that everyone can do, and how the sustainable or the green choice should be for everyone, and not just for a few people. So that's what's really important to me. And I think engineers play a role in that, because we're always looking at those innovative and different solutions. We understand the data and we know where it can lead. But I think what's really important to me with restoring the world as a question is the fact that that's humanity and that's stories. And there's a fact that I believe was from one of the climate change reports a couple of years ago that said all the new technology out there to save the world exists, but people don't want to use it or can't use it or don't understand it. So the human element is really important, because if people don't change their mind or don't take up all the new things you're doing, you're not going to get to that better place. And another thing that comes to mind with restoring the earth is it's the importance of stories and the history of people, and learning from the past, and kind of, you know, restoring means bringing it back to its best. So it's not all about new stuff. It's also about preserving some of that history, and incorporating that into whatever kind of modern new thing. So is that an answer to the question?
Definitely is, and that's wonderful to have that, the inspiration, and again that really human side. To be working with communities is so important, and empowering people as well. And Rosa, on restoring our earth, is there anything that's really inspired you that engineering can help solve?
Yeah, I think I find that there's quite a lot of different like environmental issues and things we want to restore, in terms of like the plastic in the sea, and like reducing our plastic production to fossil fuels and reducing our emissions through that. And so the even within the like energy renewables discussion, is constantly, we don't just, not just finding a solution, but trying to improve it and make it more efficient. And also in terms of the materials, like for example with solar panels, like where are these materials coming from? Can we make it more ethically sourced? Like, can we also make sure we have alternatives? Like, are these finite materials and things like that? So it's a very complex issue when you go down into the details, but I think anybody can get engaged and get interested in this wider problem, the ways in which engineering can solve problems.
That's so interesting, and it again shows the breadth of places that engineers can turn up to solve all these different problems. And this year, Earth Day are raising the importance of education, especially climate and environmental literacy, because this will create jobs, it will build a greener market and help people engage meaningfully to solve climate change together. Do you think environmental literacy is something that's a prominent part of your engineering journey, whether that's through study or work? Is engineering good at starting those conversations? And Olivia, shall we pop to you first?
Yeah, definitely. I think environmental literacy, as you said, is really important. I think engineering degrees have evolved. I didn't graduate that long ago, but they've evolved a lot since I left university. So I would say the language is being much more embedded, and the understanding of that into every single part of it. Whereas a little bit when I was studying, it was kind of an add-on at the side. But I definitely learned a lot. And for me, it was mainly through my summer internships or jobs where I really chose things that were related to the green sphere. And so I was able to learn a lot. And, you know, climate language in academia is different to climate language in business, is different to climate language in the public. So you're learning a lot of those things. So you need to kind of experience different places to do that. And I think engineering is great because it gives you the confidence to do that. And because you're always working with and talking with different people. So you're always improving those communication skills. And as we've said before, you're grounding it in science. So you're reading the academic papers, or you're doing the work, but then you're translating it to loads of different places. So yeah, I think it's a great conversation starter. But also look for things outside of the classroom, because that's really important as well.
That's fascinating. And again, goes back to showing that engineering is really broad, and it lets you meet new people, have conversations in all those different types of places with different types of people, which is so important. Rosa, do you agree that engineering is a hub for those environmental conversations?
Yes, definitely. It's part of my course to study the ethics and environmental side of engineering, and I think from the beginning I recognized the responsibility that engineers have in helping, or in serving the environment and serving communities, as well as whoever the customer may be. And so I definitely want to go down the route of working in sustainability, because I feel like sustainability fits in so well with an engineer's responsibility. I think that knowledge of climate change and knowledge of having this environmental literacy allows more people to engage in the discussions and become more passionate about engineering and about how we can solve these problems through various ways, but engineering is one of them. And so having more people aware of it allows greater changes in the end goal. And I think, as Olivia was saying earlier, in terms of it's also important to learn from the past. So literacy isn't about all this new terminology, but it's also about learning from rural communities, for example, and decolonizing that education, because there's so much and so many lessons in our history, and a lot of communities have had such a harmonious relationship with the environment, and so it's tapping into that and learning from that as well.
That's great and so important, and engineering is so well placed to have those conversations with local communities and to start those empowering future-facing solutions, which is so nice to be a part of. We're almost at time, so I'm going to just ask one last really hard question for the last thing. Olivia, what's your favourite animal?
That is actually a really hard question. Because it came out of nowhere. I don't know what my favourite animal is. I'm broadly a fan of amphibians, because I like the fact that they can live on land and in water. I like their adaptability to different climates. I'm not going to be specific, but I'm going to say amphibians as a whole.
That is such an engineer answer, because again, it's you can't choose what area you want to work in. And Rosa, what's your favourite animal?
Yeah, that is a tricky question. I think maybe elephants. I always been a fan of elephants.
They're beautiful creatures, and I believe they're matrilineal, so the women are in charge, so gotta like elephants for that as well. So thank you so much for your answers today. I've learned so much. We've reached our time for this session, but don't worry, we've got lots more information on our website for you to discover more about engineering and sustainability. If you have enjoyed today and you'd like to learn more, we have lots of case studies on our website, as well as access to our Museum of Engineering Innovation. So visit thisisengineering.org.uk to find out more. And our website also has details for school resources and other links you may find useful for engineering in the future. An extra thank you to our wonderful engineers, Olivia and Rosa. It has been fascinating to learn about everything from bacteria that eats plastic through to footballs producing electricity, as well as, well, that's it. Learning more about frogs, I think, might be the next topic too. So thank you for celebrating Earth Day with us, seeing how engineers can be the difference.